name is Amanda Hislop, and I am the Project Manager for the Drones Initiative at the Catapult. Before we get started, I'd like to take you through the format for today's webinar. First of all, we will hear a few words from Greg Easter, our DFT sponsor, who is Head of Innovation Strategy within Emerging Aviation. Mark Westwood, our Chief Technology Officer from the CPC, will then spend a few minutes on why CPC is involved in the unmanned traffic management space. I will then provide you with an overview of the UTM project to date, along with the partner collaborations formed. AJ, our Principal Technologist for UTM, will go on to discuss why UTM is important, some of the challenges being faced, and what is being done to develop the capability. Konstantinos, our UTM Senior Technologist, will discuss more detailed concept of operations, stakeholders, and the UTM architecture, and outline the next steps for this year. AJ will then conclude by talking through the way forward for UTM. During the presentation, please feel free to submit your questions using the button on your screen, which is the Q&A button. If you've dialed in via YouTube, please do email us with some questions directly if you need to. I've put the email address on the screen there, which is drones@cp.catapult.org.uk. We will review and discuss as many questions as we have time for today, and Greg and Mark will remain on the line to answer as required. Once the webinar is finished today, we will email you with the link to the white paper, which is being launched later this morning, and a full list of the Q&A that we go through today. So do look out on CPC social media forums such as LinkedIn and Twitter for the white paper, which will be launched with the press release. So first of all, I'd like to hand you over to Greg Easter. Over to you, Greg.
Good morning. Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everyone. I think we had over 200 people registering, so I hope most of those, if not more of you, have been able to join us either live or can watch us later on. I think it's actually been, whilst a very difficult time the last couple of months, we have certainly DFT seen quite a lot of success in holding engagement sessions through video conferencing services. So hopefully, if this is like others, we may actually see a lot more people involved this morning than would have been had we been holding it in person. So DFT is very proud to be sponsoring this project, both last financial year and I'm pleased to say this financial year as well. It's part of a portfolio of projects where DFT look to the Connected Places Catapult to sort of help us sort of bridge that gap between government and industry across a whole range of transport challenges. And this is a very good example of a project where the Catapult have been able to bring in a whole range of people from industry to work collaboratively on a very challenging and technical subject. So I saw myself last year, a range of people, most of them competitors, working closely together, which I realise is a difficult challenge. So I was really impressed by the sort of level of cooperation and sort of shared work between industry, obviously sort of involving DFT and the CAA as well. So very positive, and I hope we can replicate that this year as the project continues to develop. We're looking forward to seeing the white paper showing progress last year, which I think is going to be published sort of any time during this meeting or immediately afterwards. Rightly, that has some challenge for industry, but also for government as well. So we're looking forward to considering that and how government respond, so we can sort of collectively move forward on the UTM issues. Very supportive of all initiatives that help us introduce new types of aviation services to our already successful aviation sector. And so finally, I'll just wrap up by saying, encourage you all to consider the white paper when it's published, also the tender documents that the project's going to be putting out, and also take this opportunity just to flag some of the wider, the complementary activities to this which are going on at the moment, mostly the UKRI's Future Flight Challenge, which applications for their phase 2 competition are open now. So please go away and sort of look at those documents as well after today's session, and I look forward to hopefully, not in the very near future, but certainly hopefully over the summer, being able to pick up some of the discussion we have today with people in person. So thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Greg. And over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and hello and welcome to everybody joining us today, wherever you are. Hope you're all safe. I'm really excited today that we're able to brief you on latest progress on this project. It's been an area of activity for the Catapult for a number of years, and as I'm sure you're well aware, the role of the Catapult here in the UK is to try and accelerate business growth. And we have long believed that drone services is a significant area with growth potential for the UK. And UTM plays a really important role in enabling that growth. Now, we're already seeing some really exciting applications for drones. And very recently, we've seen the really interesting work that's going on in Southampton, for example, where we're seeing beyond visual line of sight deployment of medical deliveries. Now, what we really want to do is to be able to enable those sorts of operations at scale, and that's where UTM, we believe, is a really important development. And not just to enable drone services at scale, but we also have industry capability in the UK that is very well placed to maximise the benefits of this technology and to export to a global market. So, a second reason why that is so important. We're really looking forward to briefing you on where we've got to this year. There's obviously exciting things that we're planning again for the months ahead. And again, just to reinforce the point that Greg was making there, we're very fortunate to have the UKRI Future Flight Programme up and running here in the UK. And we are very much hoping that this work will be exploited into future flight. So lots of exciting things ahead of us, and hope you enjoy the rest of this webinar. I'll hand back to Amanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Right, I'd like to just introduce you now to the project, looking at some of the partners that we've been collaborating with as well. So first of all, you'll see a slide with our project partners. You can see there we've got quite a few that have been engaging with us over the past couple of years. So that goes from GE, Aerox, Thales, Snowflake and NATS. And we've also been working very closely with the Civil Aviation Authority throughout, dealing with regulation potentials, etc. So the first year of the project objectives were spent capturing and understanding what the requirements for an open access unmanned traffic management system for industry, government and regulators should look like. The team developed some generic use cases, and whilst mapping out the technical, operational and safety requirements across the use cases. Close stakeholder engagement took place to form a consensus between industry, government and the regulator for a future UTM architecture. This resulted in the first white paper being published in October 2019, which some of you may have seen and be familiar with, which is the Towards a UTM System for the UK. Moving on to the next phase, the main objectives were to build on the previous year's work, advancing the architecture, concept of operations and data exchange requirements. Working again closely with our consortium partners, a UTM implementation and capability plan was developed to provide a vision for the way forward for UTM to be tested and trialled. So this has resulted in a further white paper, which, as the guys have mentioned, is being launched as we speak, enabling a UTM system for the UK. You will see in the final stage on the slide for this year, it shows that we're planning to do testing and trials of UTM, which Konstantinos and AJ will talk about later. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to AJ.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is AJ Moda, and I'm the Principal Technologist for the unmanned aviation related activities at the Catapult. Over the next few slides, what I'd like to talk to you about is the importance of UTM. I want to explain to you why UTM is so important to the drones industry and how we can move the whole industry forward. Now, the drone industry today is in a similar position as the aircraft industry was about 80 years ago. We wanted to grow the air traffic because people wanted to fly airplanes, but it became impossible for pilots to operate aircraft by themselves, and air traffic became necessary for the safe growth of the sector. Traffic management was able to grow the air traffic by enabling the industry to work together to plan and deconflict flights. It provided situational awareness to users, but more than that, it created a very well-defined and known airspace environment in which to operate aircraft. And finally, we created solutions for in-flight separation and collision avoidance. These aspects are also very important for the operations of drones. As an industry, we look to grow both the line of sight flights and beyond line of sight markets. Therefore, today, the lack of traffic management represents a barrier to the growth of the drone industry. Now, I'm not suggesting we go back to the traditional traffic management solutions. We can take advantage of modern technologies in computing, automation, and connectivity to create a traffic management ecosystem which can respond to the predictions of the market. We know market assessments have given us several numbers, but in the UK, it's predicted that we will have 75,000 drones providing commercial services by 2030. That's a huge increase in drone traffic we need to create. This brings me to another crucial point about UTM. There is a significant market opportunity within the UK and globally for drone-based services, particularly at low altitudes, across a range of industrial sectors. Drone services have already created a disruption in the market and has attracted expertise from new entrants as well as traditional aviation businesses. However, like many disruptive technologies, we have to bridge a gap in order to secure an advantage and use it to leverage into the mainstream market. In my mind, this bridging has to be done with UTM. In order to grow the commercial drone services industry, we will need to bridge this big, scary chasm, which is integrating drones into our national airspace. The solution is provided by UTM, and then the introduction of UTM infrastructure will open up market to new opportunities and enable the growth of the industry. I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges in moving UTM forward and how some of these may be resolved. As with any large-scale technology project, development of a traffic management system or framework requires a consensus and collaboration of different stakeholders. This can inevitably complicate the design or create unworkable compromises. To overcome these issues, we need to work harder in building consensus on industry needs, architectures, and technologies, and make progress on all of these. Now, the Future Flight Challenge is a wonderful opportunity for the unmanned industry in the UK, but to progress UTM requires adoption of at least a common starting point. Otherwise, we risk creating divergent UTM solutions. The next generation of traffic management will result in a data-rich and service-driven ecosystem, which will be built using large-scale IT infrastructure expertise, not dissimilar to what is needed to create technologies behind things like Netflix and Amazon Web Services. This creates challenges on data protection, cybersecurity, and safety of automated services. Given the emergent nature of the drone sector, the regulators may struggle to provide regulatory cover, as rulemaking is typically slower than the pace at which technology is moving. It is therefore critical to create effective partnerships between the regulator and the community to enable effective sharing. For example, this UTM project has involved the CAA's Innovation Hub in many of the workshops to capture regulatory perspectives. Joint learning and sharing will enable the industry to accelerate forward, and this has been my experience on the government Pathfinder program. Many safety critical industries adopt a safety first approach to new technologies, and aviation is no different. Progress can be slowed down by the need for increased complexity of testing, particularly with software-based systems. Therefore, it is even more important that UTM is developed in a coordinated fashion and that government, regulator, and industry work together to accelerate the development of UTM. The aim in tackling these challenges should be to come together on policy, standards, and regulations. Next slide, please. The Open-Access UTM program is one of these collaborative research and development projects in which government, industry, and the CAA have engaged to address some of these issues mentioned. This work should be considered to provide direction and address the initial gaps in the market. Operating different types of drones above 400 feet alongside manned aircraft presents multiple technical and operational challenges. Therefore, UTM has to take incremental steps by developing a solution for one class of drones to learn, gather evidence in order to progress towards an integrated airspace. Critically, it should address the market needs for services and not create a technology for its own sake. The progression shown on the slide is one way of looking at this challenge. For example, due to the way UK airspace is divided, there is a clear opportunity to progress the use of small drones below 400 feet and to learn from this experience. The progression shown on the slide is meant to capture the increasing levels of complexity to be solved in moving towards an integrated traffic management solution. It's not meant to inform you of anything else. To achieve this integration, we need to find solutions in many areas, such as electronic conspicuity for vehicles, effective detect and avoid solutions. This progression is one view, which is meant to start that discussion and how we can start thinking about enabling the operations of unmanned vehicles. Getting back to level 1 UTM, which is a work of the white paper we're publishing today. This slide shows a list of key features. The framework is designed to support operations under 400 feet for small drones, which most of you are familiar with. It will support both visual line of sight and beyond visual line of sight flights in normal and emergency situations. The key technology requirements are that of automation, electronic conspicuity. Electronic identification for the drone industry is a hot topic, and I don't intend to go into the details of that. Open-Access UTM has been developed to be broadly consistent with other UTM initiatives in Europe and the USA. It shares a common list of services, stakeholders, and communication principles. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Konstantinos, who's now going to give you more details about the Open-Access UTM framework.
Thanks, AJ. Hello, everyone. My name is Konstantinos Madarakis, and I'm a senior system engineer in Connected Places Catapult. In this section, we will present a summary of the Open-Access UTM concept of operation and provide further information regarding the next steps. Over the last 2 years, we have concluded to a federated architecture that enables multiple service providers to operate in the same environment. This is illustrated in the figure, where all stakeholders, except from CAA, are represented with multiple layers. In this figure, the arrow represents the required interfaces and shows the points of interaction across the architecture. It's worth mentioning that the Open UTM SP and its interfaces will be developed in the next phase of the project in 2021 program. Some of the key roles that we have identified in this architecture are the CA, the UTMSPs, ATMSPs, public authorities, public, STSPs, US operators, and Open-Access UTMSPs. The Civil Aviation Authority will provide safety oversight and lead on regulatory framework for the UTM system and service providers. The CA will also provide oversight of different services to protect the public and consumers of the UTM services. The UTMSPs will enable US operators to operate in a national airspace safely and efficiently by providing critical services and tools. The air traffic management service providers will have the responsibility to manage manned aviation of all types in design classes of airspace and will have the power to approve or deny any UTM activities that are deemed to interact with the ATM. The public authorities now include the national and local authorities, such as the government departments, authorities, councils, and emergency services that are expected to play key roles to coordinate access to airspace or potentially impact operations. Public users or the general public could access the generic information of the airspace. These implemented data service providers now offer additional services, information that will support a UTM stakeholder to plan and validate information or an information decision-making process. US operators consider in this architecture the drone pilots and the operating organizations. Now, one of the key stakeholders is the Open-Access UTMSP. The Open-Access UTMSP is an entity which is managed by service providers to host critical services and functions to facilitate interactions among stakeholders and enable fair and equitable access across the UTM environment. The developed system gives the flexibility some of the services and the functions which are hosted in the Open UTMSP to be distributed to other service providers. The distribution of the services will depend on the role of the Open UTMSP service, and this will define the degree of federation. An example is given in the next slide, where we present a semi-federated and a more federated approach. In this slide, we present the main services required in the Open-Access UTM system by the Open UTMSP and other service providers. The services with asterisk are examples that can be distributed outside of the Open UTMSP to another service provider, such as the UTMSP. The first figure presents a semi-federated approach where most of the services, such as the dynamic restriction, are hosted in the Open UTMSP. In the second figure now, a more federated approach is illustrated, where some of the services and the functions have been distributed to the UTMSPs. For example, the dynamic restriction, which is required for the public authorities, might be provided by an authorized UTMSP with a special capability to create dynamic restrictions. The final degree of federation for the UK might be defined when we have collected enough evidence for the architecture through simulations and trials. At this point, it's worth mentioning that further information regarding the services, the roles and responsibilities can be found in the white paper. This year, we are going to be in a CR&D project in which we intend to integrate all the self-components such as UTM platforms, services, products, and standards, and conduct systematic field trials to de-risk and validate the Open-Access UTM concept and technologies. The main objectives of this program are to develop the Open-Access UTM system, considering pillars such as automation, digitalization, and data sharing. Another objective is to develop the necessary underpinning technologies, services, interfaces of the Open-Access UTM to support initial UTM trials. We'll also like to give attention to areas such as electronic conspicuity, flight planning, strategic deconfliction, traffic awareness, flight information, and identification. We'll also demonstrate multiple UTMSPs interoperability and data exchange using Open UTM services. Last but not least, we'll evaluate use cases in nominal and off-nominal conditions to stress test the operational procedures and the UTM services. In this year's project, we will also assess and signpost UTM research areas, such as communication requirements on standards, interoperability, security, and infrastructure, and align them with internationally recognized UTM standards. We'll also like to assess regulatory considerations on automation, service providers, and non-cooperative US operations. Last, we will investigate concepts to integrate larger now unmanned aircraft vehicles and different operating envelopes. At this point, it's worth mentioning that in the near future, we would like to publish the learnings from the trials and use the Open-Access UTM framework in other initiatives such as the Future Flight project to develop additional key services, procedures that will unlock US operations in more complex environments, such as the controlled airspace and unsegregated airspace. Some of the expected outcomes of this year's trials are to develop an initial UTM build level and associated specification, identify the initial set of industry and open access UTM capabilities required to support the UTM operations, and identify future UTM policy and research needs, and provide also an understanding of level of investments required for the trials phase. Thank you very much. Now I'll pass to AJ, who will give more information on the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Konstantinos. You've heard about the background of the Open Access UTM project and where we've got to over the last couple of years. And you've heard about the challenges facing us and the progress we've made. Now I'd like to conclude with 3 points about how UTM can be delivered in the UK. The industry and government is all committed to creating a safe environment for drones and enable routine access to the airspace. But this requires a coordinated approach across the community. A UK UTM roadmap is needed to provide the clarity and direction about how UTM can support and unlock commercial drone operations. This will require a user-focused approach to ensure it captures market needs and relevant applications. Thus, it needs input from the industry. The roadmap can contribute to the activities of the roadmap can contribute to activities in the UK, including the UK's airspace modernization strategy, the Drone Industry Action Group, and the CAA's Innovation Hub. I think it's important to recognize that working together on this is the way forward. Now, CPC, in partnership with DFT and CAA's Innovation Hub, started gathering data for the roadmap prior to the lockdown. We invited a range of individuals and companies from the industry to take part in this. This work isn't completed, and we intend to move this forward over the next few months. As UTM evolves, there is a need for different forums in the UK to engage on UTM. This could be the roadmap or through the Future Flight Challenge in order to tackle many of the challenges. We need greater cooperation to capture learnings across many regulatory technology and critically the economic challenges facing large-scale deployment of UAS services. This project has indeed highlighted many areas of research still outstanding, which you will find in the report. As we move forward with the Future Flight Challenge, we need to think about not just the different classes of unmanned vehicles that exist and that for which services can be provided, but also we need to capture the safety requirements of an automated traffic management solution. We need to focus on how to leverage existing knowledge and build on it. For example, use the Open Access UTM framework for targeted trials to help us unlock the industry. So in summary, we released the Open Access UTM report today, which will provide you with details of the framework. In support of that, this webinar intended to provide you an overview of the collaborative R&D project that we've undertaken, but also inform on the challenges in taking UTM forward. I believe UTM bridges many of the gaps to enable the industry to grow, and it is critical that the community works together to achieve many of the market predictions. Thank you for listening. I'm going to facilitate the questions with our panel, which is Greg Easter from DFT, Mark Westwood, CPC's Chief Technology Officer, myself and Konstantinos. We will try and answer the questions submitted through the Q&A facility, and we may not struggle with the technology because I see that there's some questions that have been posted, but please bear with us as we get through that. So the first question, I think, why differentiate between UTM and ATM, and can these be single entities? Mark?
Thanks, AJ. And I think really we would probably consider that logically as an endpoint, they probably don't need to be different entities. But right now, those are the sort of terminologies that we're all comfortable and familiar with. And we've got to take this one step at a time.
Thank you. I think there is a clear separation between ATM and UTM as well, which the report goes into. ATM is an established sector which has got safety requirements and everything else. What we are talking about is initial UTM needs to be below 400 feet. It doesn't need to intersect as with ATM in the way that you've spoken about. However, there are some solutions around that and how those UTM and ATM can interface. And we go into details in the report. There's a second question which I'll read it out. Do you therefore envisage a single service provider to all users in a single volume of airspace? Perhaps I can give a little bit more background to this one. There's a view within the European U-Space UTM framework, if you will, that there would be 3 classes of airspace created, X, Y, and Z. And perhaps the question is related to that, which is if you have a particular kind of airspace that you only have one service provider within that. Open-Access UTM doesn't do that. It allows many service providers to come together to cooperatively plan, deconflict flights, and then execute them in any airspace. The only difference being we have in Open-Access UTM, we have the ATM zones or flight restriction zones in the UK, as we call them, and then you have uncontrolled airspace. Sorry, I'm just going through the list of questions. There's a question around who will make international UTM standards. Mark, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think here we'd expect to see the fairly usual pattern of standards development. I think we've got lots of activity going on at the national level. And obviously that's then brought together and coordinated into, for example, the European and wider through organisations like ICAO. In the UK, I think it's fortunate to be well represented on those forums. And we, having really interesting and novel research activity like this enables us to have a strong voice in shaping how those international standards get made in just the same way that we would see the work that the CAA did on things like CAP 722 going back 10 or more years, played a really influential role in shaping how European standards have evolved. So that's what I would expect to see.
Thank you, Mark. I think this is another related question. To what extent do you anticipate the UK Open-Access UTM specification to stay aligned with the US ASTM specification? Perhaps I can answer that. For those who may not be aware, ASTM, which is a standards body based in the US, have been working with a number of UTM companies out there based on the NASA FAA program of work to create a set of standards for communications. It's not a standard on the whole UTM framework. So we have considered a number of those standards in the Open-Access UTM framework, and there's definitely flexibility to incorporate some of them, including the remote ID standard. Our view is that by remaining flexible and broadly aligned with some of these initiatives, that we would be able to capture the broadest market into the UK. So there's one question here. Industry can only scale with widespread widespread automation, taking the B and the V out of line of sight. Conspicuity and connectivity obviously key, but below 400 feet. Sorry, it's a long one there. I'll move on to another one and I'll come back to that one. How does the industry get involved in the 2021 UTM trials? In short, what is the invitation process? So in short, the trials activity is on Contracts Finder, has been there for about 10 days now. You will find all of the details on how to access the key information for the trials on there, including details of what we intend to build out of the Open-Access UTM framework and what we're looking for. Would the slides be available after the webinar? Yes, they will. I believe the webinar is also being recorded and it will be published on our website, I believe. Sorry, lots of questions coming through. How are we? Okay, is a question about counter drone equipment with regards to UTM. How are we planning to tackle the increase in counter UAS equipment with regards to UTM? Well, counter drone equipment in itself is very interesting. Rather than talking about the counter drone equipment, I'd rather perhaps I can draw a similarity with the requirements for surveillance and tracking of drones in not just normal uncontrolled airspace, but in controlled airspace as well, where there's a need to make sure we know what the airspace looks like and who's operating in it. And I would see that UTM incorporates a number of the outputs from some of this kind of equipment. I don't specifically know how counter-drone equipment might fit in, given that there are regulatory implications of the use of some of the technologies within counter-drones that need to be overcome first. So the tracking and the surveillance aspects, perfect, we can use that. How are the needs of manned aviation in uncontrolled airspace taken into account? Mark?
This is always a challenging one, and I guess here what we're seeing is some evolution around things like electronic conspicuity, some of the solutions that are now available. Some of those being at significantly different price points to where they might have been previously, but there'll always be I think a requirement in uncontrolled airspace to have good situation awareness of other traffic that's within it.
And also I would like to add here that we are working on some similar projects that trying to integrate unmanned aviation, general aviation with the UTM environment. So it is an area that we are looking on.
What interaction have we had with the BSI and the ISO standards groups? We have had some interaction with both the ISO and BSI standards group, but as you well know that UTM as a technology is emerging, and we are trying to develop the technology at the same time as trying to write standards, which is always a bit difficult, but also rulemaking is always a little bit behind. So trying to progress all three things has always been a challenge. However, we look forward to working with BSI in the UK to take the whole UTM agenda forward. There are many questions about UTM. Let's pick one on how will security and UTM resilience be provided against faulty or non-cooperative drones, and also drones that are deliberately being misused? there's a broader question within this, which is that can UTM capture both the cooperative and non-cooperative use of drones? It's an open question. There are solutions available, but it's not a question just about technology. It has to bring together technology, enforcement, and the cooperation of the user base to get over some of the issues raised in that question. I think in terms of resilience, I think we have technology solutions for that. That can solve that, but the broader ecosystem has to involve all of the different parties to solve that. There's a question about the ITT. Have potential trial sites been, moved away. Have potential trial sites been identified? I think the answer is yes and no. We know of trial sites in the UK, and we know that there are individuals and organizations that be interested. But we will, once we've made a decision on that one, we will be announcing, we will be talking to the industry on that. There's again a question about the BSI's UTM committee and engaging with them. It refers to the fact that they have that committee is trying to develop UTM standards. Is there a scope for collaboration here? Maybe Mark, you perhaps want to kind of talk about the cooperation angle, which is, you know, we have Future Flight trying to solve the unmanned industry's challenges. We have the industry, and then we've got the standards bodies as well, and how we might work together.
Yeah, I think the key here is trying to align lots of different strands of activity, and I think that's hopefully something that the Catapult is well suited to. We've got regulatory developments, and if we look at the work that, for example, the CAA is doing around its innovation hub, that's a real step forward, and trying to make sure that we align activities of things like the regulator, the R&D landscape, and government is really important. And again, that's one of the key roles that we see for the Catapult in trying to maintain alignment and keep things moving forward.
Thank you. There's another related question, I suppose, here, which the question is, do we have a target timeline for the successful rollout of the different UTM levels? I'd just like to add that the different UTM levels are something that we use as a means to explain the complexity in flying and operating different sizes and capabilities of drones. There's a bigger question around that, which is, how do we enable the different types of vehicles, different capability vehicles? Now, Future Flight is really important in this. And Mark, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sorry, AJ, I was reading a different question as you were saying that, so maybe just run me back through that again. Sorry.
The question is, do we have a targeted timeline for the successful rollout of UTM level 1, 2, 3, etc.? And what my point was that the timeline for, sorry, not the timeline, but the different UTM capability levels that I showed were for more about getting the discussion rolling about what we would need to do to tackle the challenges when we have different sizes of unmanned aircraft operating in the airspace next to manned aircraft. Everybody has a different capability. The challenges are actually, the barriers are quite high. But Future Flight as a challenge is trying to solve a number of these things, because it's not looking at any specific vehicle. It's saying there are 3 vehicle classes, and how do we integrate them into the airspace? So do you have any thoughts on that, and how we integrate different types of vehicles?
Yeah, so maybe look at it from a slightly different perspective. Firstly, I mean, there's been a number of questions that have come up in the chat about the relationship of this work, which is where we're really talking, we've talked a lot about drones and what's the relationship of that to things like UAM and whatever. And actually, I think we've always seen, and I say we as in not just CPC, but everybody that's been involved in this project, from industry, government, regulator, we've always thought that the bigger platforms like UAM are a logical endpoint. And, you know, in the lifetime of future flight, are we going to see volume UAM flights? No, I don't think so. But it's a very important step along the way. And maybe just going back to the first question, which was around the level 1, 2, 3, if I'd answer it in a slightly different way, rather than thinking it from the technical or technologist perspective of how long does it take to do things, I would say I'm looking at the market opportunity and how fast we need to move to make sure the UK has the opportunity that we believe it can do. And I would suggest that in the lifetime of the Future Flight Programme, which I think runs to end of 2023, start of 2024, we need to be seeing UTM deployment and seeing operations at scale. Otherwise, we will be at risk of being overtaken by other countries.
Thank you, Mark. One question about ANSPs and their role in enabling UTM and how important is this? If I can just kind of step back and say, as the traditional manned aviation in the UK, if you look around us in the industry, there are more than 100, 120, 150 airports in the UK. All of them have been recently categorized as flight restriction zones. And then if you look at other flight restriction zones in the UK with their critical national infrastructure, you're looking at a whole new market in which ANSPs can engage with traffic management solutions that allow drones to be operated in those environments. So they're absolutely critical to the whole infrastructure, and they bring a unique experience to the whole ecosystem. So I would say, yes, absolutely important. There are some technical questions in relation to UTM that I think we will direct you to the UTM report. For example, questions about dynamic restrictions and how they may work. There's some questions about the marine environment. Yes, UTM is designed. So Open-Access UTM, as I said earlier, doesn't create new classes of airspace. It tries to work within the airspace classifications we have. So I hope that that includes the marine environment as well. There's a broader question about how do we envisage ensuring the commitment of new entrants, SMEs, and established OEMs to come into the industry. I think if I read that question right, it's kind of a long one. The drone industry is absolutely key in this environment, in this system. That the market has attracted new talent and new SMEs who want to create not just new technologies and innovations, but actually they're interested in creating new services and delivering those. So I would say they're very important in this ecosystem, and UTM should allow us to actually not just grow the industry, but actually attract more entrants into this. It's all about opportunity. There's a general technical question about GPS. What about GPS jamming, solar flares, the reliance on GPS not being suitable, and how should UTM deal with it? Interesting question. There there are multiple solutions, GPS being one kind of technology, but across the board, GNSS has got different solutions, and I think it's resilient. There are challenges around it, and we accept those, but we, as an industry, will have to solve those together.
I guess and just building on that, AJ, this is a question, it's relating to risk and relating to integrity.
Yes.
And, clearly, for some types of platform and operation, a single GPS or other GNSSs are available. A single one won't be an acceptable solution.
Well, thank you, Mark. That's a good point. There's a question on interoperability. Will there be interoperability between UTM service providers, or do they have to go via the Open UTM service? I'll give this one to Konstantinos.
So there are some areas that we would like to bring the different service providers, so we need this interoperability. However, there are some other services that they have to go through the Open-Access UTM service provider. So it's a little bit balanced, not one way or the other. I think we have to assess different procedures, different interoperability methods.
Thank you, Konstantinos. Just trying to run through to make sure we've captured most of the questions.
AJ, I
Yes.
just noticed there's still a few more questions just around on the sort of theme of how can I get involved? How do I find out more? How do I, as an SME or a testing site, get involved in the project? So just conscious of running slightly out of time. Would it be worth someone from the Catapult just running through again the process around tendering?
No, thank you, Greg. We can probably take a step back. Mark, if you just talk about how the Catapult can actually help SMEs and anyone else who's interested in this area, and then I can probably come in and talk a little bit more about the ITT itself.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, AJ. So, I mean, one of the sort of key enabling functions of the Catapult, and I talked earlier on about, our role is here to identify new market opportunities and help companies exploit those. We do have a dedicated SME team here, and we run accelerator programs across a wide range of different technologies. And we are actively working with a number of SMEs in this space and in other areas to help them accelerate the development of their products and services. I should stress the Catapult it's an independent and neutral organisation, so that's a very key part of our role. And again, through moving into this program, then we've got opportunities for companies to be involved at various stages. And I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the third piece of work where we will have gone out to the market to look for partners. And we've had different partners involved in different stages. And perhaps, AJ, you can just reinforce how people can get involved at this stage.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So as I said, the the ITT documents are on Contracts Finder, which will direct you to a different portal, which is Proactis, which is a system that we use for our commercial processes. Within that, once you'll have to register as an organization to access it. But when you do, in there, you will find there's a document that talks about this year's project. It highlights what we're trying to achieve with Open-Access UTM. It gives you details of the systems we're trying to build and the expertise we're looking for. Key to this is that essentially we're trying to create the main interaction, which is the Open UTM service with the UTM service providers to enable drones to be flown. We also provide a specification of the system that we want to build and the initial set of services that we're asking people to respond with. So there are certain requirements in terms of participation that people would need to have as an organization. You need to have a UTM platform and that you can create software yourselves. Without that, unfortunately, the project cannot move forward. So those are key requirements, and I would suggest that everybody register onto Practice and have a look at the details of that. Right. I think we've probably answered most of the questions. I think if there are any other questions that we've missed out, what we'll look to do is provide answers via the website. But thank you for listening to us today, and I'll pass you over to Amanda.
Thanks, AJ. So we've reached the end of the webinar now, so I'd like to thank all the speakers for attending and contributing today. A reminder for you that if you are unable to submit any questions during the webinar, then please send us those to our email address, which you can see on the screen there, and we will respond to you. You will also receive an email from our events team providing you with the link to the white paper, which is being launched today, and the list of the full Q&A. And as we mentioned earlier, the slides from today will go on our webpage. Again, we will also send you the link to that. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for joining.